Hi, everybody, and welcome. We are so glad to be with you this afternoon for a conversation about Harvard and what makes for a good MBA applicant to the Harvard School of Business. My name is Judith Silverman Hodara. Delighted to be here with my amazing colleagues from Fortuna Admissions, Carla Cohen and Rebecca Fogg. So happy to have the opportunity to speak with everybody today and to hear a little bit about what's on your mind and to also pick the brains of Carla and Rebecca and find out about what happens in the admissions office at Harvard Business School. We are very, very happy to be here today with one of our terrific partners, Poets&Quants, and wanted to remind you that there is a Q&A box, so you can certainly ask us questions. We will do our best to answer them. If for any reason we don't get to you today, please feel free to reach out to us at Fortuna Admissions. We do offer half-hour free consultations. Some of our colleagues and some of our friends say they're the best in the business. And I know for sure that I love the opportunity to talk with prospective students about their interest in applying to any business school, not just Harvard. So it's really easy to reach us. It's info@fortunaadmissions.com. Delighted again to have Carla and Rebecca with us today. So I am gonna screen share in just a moment. I'm gonna give you guys an opportunity to not see that one. You're going to be looking at our slideshow, which is an HBS Masterclass. So without further ado, wanted to welcome Carla again and Rebecca, and just getting set here. Just give me a sec with this, and wanted to dive in with Carla Cohen is the former associate director at Harvard Business School, and Rebecca Fogg is a Harvard MBA and research colleague of very, very well-known and respected HBS professor Clayton Christensen. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. A little bit about Fortuna. We are a team of about 40 gatekeepers from the world's top business schools, including the schools that you see on our screen. Again, free consultation, great way to get a sense of what we do and why we do it, and excited to have the opportunity to speak with you. So wanted to just sort of dive in with a little bit of a news about our upcoming webinars. Our Masterclass series continues on Wednesday, June 22nd at 12 noon with Stanford GSB, and then on Wednesday, June 29th, again with Wharton MBA Admissions Masterclass. You can register for all of these online, and they're really, really good sessions, a great way to learn more about the programs from people that have actually been decision makers in the admissions cycles. So without further ado, let's jump in and talk about what is HBS really looking for. So Becca, I'm going to turn that over to you.
Terrific. Thanks, Judith. And welcome, everybody. Really glad to be here. If you've studied the HBS website, you'll know that their mission is to educate leaders who will make a difference in the world. And Harvard believes the candidates who can do that have three core qualities. It's engaged community citizenship, analytical aptitude and appetite, and a habit of leadership. To remember those easily, we like to think of the acronym CAL: citizenship, analytics, and leadership. Engaged community citizenship, in short, it means that you care about something larger than yourself. So Harvard really does want evidence that you're motivated by your positive impact on others, that you consistently pursue it, and that you're successful in achieving it. It's not a last minute effort that you undertook to round out your app. It's not a hobby. It's something that you care very much about, even if it's extracurricular. In terms of analytic aptitude and appetite, again, this is not just about grades and scores, the usual stuff. In fact, it doesn't even mean that everyone has to be a master model builder. What it does mean is that you can do the work. You're numerate, you're not afraid of the numbers, and even more important, you have a deep intrinsic motivation for pursuing the analytics. So you're intellectually curious and open-minded. You want to learn what the numbers can tell you, and you want to put it to use in service of your larger mission. The third point, habit of leadership. They want to know that you have a proven talent for pulling teams together, for helping people grow and perform in their full potential in both formal and informal settings. And they want to know that you are one of those people who they like to call a culture carrier. And I love that term. It's that person in your organization, and I'm sure you've met them, who sets a positive, ethical tone and helps create an environment where everybody can be engaged and do their best and do the right thing. So another subtext to all of these things, again, is its consistency over time. What do these people look like in terms of, I have a big reunion at HBS coming up this weekend, and I'm thinking of a section mate who had a PhD in statistics and noticed that that was a course that a lot of people were having challenges with because they hadn't been exposed to it before. So he just voluntarily set up review sessions every day for 2 weeks before the exam. But a bigger example is another classmate who is a very notable figure in his industry and has a very demanding full-time career in that area, but is also on the board of a large hospital system. And during the pandemic, he was working 24/7 to address respirator shortages. So those are things that Harvard doesn't consider icing on the cake. It's, these kinds of core qualities are really considered absolutely instrumental to the kind of candidate that they want to accept.
Carla, we're going to turn to you and want to sort of chat a little bit about how can I stand out? I know this is the question that everybody wants to know in the field of applicants for HBS. Reflecting on what Rebecca has said about the qualities of HBS that are important and what they're really looking for. How do you think in your years of coaching, and I know you've got a lot of examples, but how do you stand out for HBS?
Well, I think first and foremost, you need to kind of shift your mindset. A lot of folks go into this and they imagine, I need to look like so-and-so who got in before me, or I know someone who had these qualities. And so they try to almost shape shift to look like someone else. And I think you need to do the opposite thing. You need to lean into your differences. Your differences are your power. That's how you can stand out. So think about, where do you exhibit really strong strengths aligned with what Rebecca was talking about with respect to when have you really demonstrated strong community engagement, as well as, think about the different areas where you are really deep in terms of your aptitude. And numbers is certainly one area that is critically important, but there can be other areas that you are really strong in terms of your undergraduate study and background. In many cases, having a non-finance or there's a lot of engineers and there's a lot of economics majors coming in, but maybe you had a minor, or maybe you studied something totally different. There's a lot of folks who assume. I even had a conversation with someone recently who was talking about how his computer science and tech background might be something that he was worried about. And I was like, no. Actually, we need more people like you for the MBA section to work. It needs to be comprised of individuals with different perspectives, different backgrounds, who can share a different perspective. There's this adage that a true education comes from encountering difference. And I think that's the foundation of a lot of what HBS tries to do, is to try to pull in different points of view. So think about, when you look at yourself, you don't want to look exactly like someone else before you. They don't want to see the same application twice, and they want to hear your story. So, telling the truth is oftentimes uncomfortable. A lot of times people feel like they have to exaggerate or inflate or brag, and that almost always backfires. So you want to be humble. You want to save letters of recommendations as areas for the bragging to kind of come through, and focus on who are you and what is really driving you, and how does that align with the mission of HBS to make a difference in the world. There's many ways to do that. And so you need to think deeply about, what is it that's driving you, and what is the evidence of that you can focus on in your application. And there's multiple places for you to bring that in, whether it's on the short answer section of the application. Many people gloss over this part or pull from their resume when they're answering the short answer, and that is a bad idea. You want to show that you have aptitude, being able to rephrase and high level some things, as well as being able to highlight your accomplishments in a way that also shows humility. So there's multiple ways to do this, but I think, high level, it's just really leaning into where you stand out and what your own differences are and how you distinguish yourself from your peers. And, everybody's different. Everyone has different strengths. You don't have to be the best at absolutely everything. So try to identify with sort of the areas of influence and, stories of individuals versus compare. That's some of the best advice that I have for people, is stop trying to compare yourself to others and really think about, how do you and what do you exhibit and what do you possess that others may not, in abundance, and then bring that to the surface of the application.
Carla, tactically, how do you suggest that one begin to do that? Do you recommend sit down with yourself and make a list about what really you feel is important to talk about? Like for people and everybody on this call, they're just getting started on this process. So what are some tactical ways to kind of get over that hump of how do I talk about myself?
I think you want to think about the milestones in your life. I think you actually want to also think about when you're finding areas of strength, it might actually be really helpful to look at times that you failed and what you learned from that, and be able to talk about that can actually be really, really interesting, because it's really kind of boring to read about people who've always sailed through life, always knew exactly what they wanted to do, and were able to, essentially breeze through things. That's not very interesting. And it also doesn't reflect real life. I think none of us saw the pandemic coming. And many businesses and individuals who had been really solid beforehand were knocked off their center. And so they want to know, like Nitin Noria used to give a speech at the end of the graduation every year while he was dean. And he would talk about sort of this Darwin idea around it's not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest who survive, it's those most able to adapt. So think about the different times when you've been stretched and pushed, and do sit down. And there's tactically, to your point, Judith, there's ways to do that. Part of what we do at Fortuna is we have you fill out a very detailed questionnaire, and we ask about challenges that go far, long before you were ever working professionally. What are some of the challenges that you faced in your life and overcome? Where have you really learned and grown? And then think about that, how that's informed different decisions. And, working with a coach can help you stitch it together into a narrative that is compelling, and that helps them understand really what's driving you. So don't be afraid to talk about the times where things did not go according to plan, and the skills that were developed as a result of that, or the resilience and grit, that has come from facing different challenges in your life. That's always very interesting. And, again, your story, none of us get through life without facing challenges. So pretending that you have and that you always knew exactly what was coming your way makes you seem less authentic. And so this is also a search for authenticity. They want plain English. They want to understand, really what is it that is bringing you to the table, and what is it that you are seeking with the general management degree. We used to joke that this isn't just leadership school. Yes, we're strong in leadership, but this is about what can you do with the skills and the education and the foundation that you will get, and how do you want to leverage that for longer term success. So it's not a quick and easy, process and answer, although some people might have a very clear vision of that. You want to be very strategic about the different stories that you tell. And as Rebecca was saying, the habit of leadership, that consistency in terms of what do you consistently do when you're faced with challenges, and where does that come from, is also, can make for a really, really interesting story. So it does require going deeper than what would show up on your resume. But that's also where you can come up with really interesting stories. It's not that interesting to read about, I was on this deal and then this deal, or I was working on this project. You want to go back to things that were more formative and that can speak to your character too. Maybe you've been challenged, or you had a loss because you took a loss because of an ethical consideration that would really reveal your character. So these are things that you can speak with consultants about. You can, really brainstorm, and there's other resources available to get a sense of what a great essay and what a great application looks like. But in the whole process, you really want to dig deep. And I think everybody's got a great story somewhere, somehow. Not everyone is a great fit. So being honest with yourself about that too. Is this the best place for you to further your ambitions? And do you have that community engagement piece that would make you a good fit for the school too? And so that's another part of working with a consultant, to figure out what's realistic, what would serve you best, and where will you thrive? And then it's about also thinking about what are you going to be able to contribute to the community. So that's another area where you can stand out, is that you might look into the different clubs that exist, or you might notice there's a gap in the different clubs that exist that you might want to get off the ground if you were to join the community. So there's opportunities there as well that you can grab their attention. Or maybe you've had a totally different experience, or you have a side gig that, distinguishes you relative to others. So a lot of individuals sometimes are like, oh, does me playing violin in the Olympics matter? It's like, oh yeah, that's, again, not that everyone has to do that, but sometimes things that are outside the scope of what you would think of as business, do show up, that can show creativity, innovative thinking, and difference in terms of diversifying the community and enriching the community.
And I think that, that's something that we definitely see when we do, these half-hour free consultations. with prospective students. Again, that's something that we offer. I love doing them. But also, that people don't always recognize that there's really good stuff that they might not see as a differentiator. And, I can read a resume or have a half-hour conversation and give you like 6 things pretty quickly that I think are going to be supportive of your candidacy. And sometimes you do need support from an outsider to say, hey, look at that, look at that, look at that. And Carla, I know that a very big question that's coming up for everybody is round 1 or round 2. And I know that around the Fortuna team, we have lots and lots of conversations about this. And nobody has a crystal ball, Carla, but what do you think about round 1 or round 2 for HBS?
So I'm going to have an answer here that is going to be a little bit controversial in the sense that it's complicated. I think there's, some people who, really feel strongly that with the recession on the horizon, that there's going to be a flood of applications coming in round 2. The reality from my perspective and my experience, and so this is where I'm drawing on, and again, I don't have a crystal ball either. If I did, I'd probably be doing something else. But the reality here is that we don't know for sure, but the schools are pretty good at predicting, and they have a lot of data, given that we've had a number of recessions before. And so since Harvard has kind of killed round 3, and that was a few years ago in a decision that Chad made, I've seen a few things happen. It may not be best to apply round 1. So that's going to be a little bit different from what a lot of people are saying. I think depends on your sector, depends on where you're coming from. And it also depends on, are you ready? I would not want someone to try to kind of game the system. And I don't really think that there's a way to game around. I think at the end of the day, either you're a great fit or you're not. But that said, it is super competitive. And if you're coming from a very crowded field, I would want to make sure that first and foremost, that your test scores are as high as possible. If you have any deficiencies in terms of if your GPA is lower than average, it doesn't mean that it's impossible to get in, but you might want to spend some time factoring in, for example, Judith at Wharton. There's so many courses now through Coursera that are inexpensive that can really help solidify, someone's academic background and help assuage concerns about someone's ability to cope with the rigor of the program. So I think you might be better served spending more time doing that and wait till round 2. I wouldn't rush to get your story together. Again, like this is a big deal. And the other thing that's happened in certain sectors, I think I've seen it predominantly in consulting and banking, there have been deferrals to round 2. They call it further consideration. So if they find that they're overwhelmed with a certain subset of applicants round 1, they may just want to wait and see and compare you to who comes in round 2. So you may not actually be getting an advantage by getting in early, and you might actually just be pushed into that next group and you lose that extra time that you could have used for getting a higher score or fortifying your academic record with even HBS has, HBS Online, they have Core and they have some other, directly relevant, coursework that can demonstrate your ability to do well in the program. And so if you were to engage in those things, I would dive all in and make sure that you're performing at the very, very top. Similar to HBS. Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, but how do they do the grading again? It's like you're either, it's a pass, high pass, or fail typically.
It's a forced curve. So top 10%, and then everybody else is in the middle, and then there's a bottom 10%. So, that's the way each course goes. And then you get a 1, 2, or a 3. So there aren't specific grades like ABC or a number. So you're ranked and forced on a curve.
Exactly. So there may be opportunity. So all of that is to say is that, if you're ready, if you have your test scores, if you have your story, go for round 1. But if you're on the fence and you're really, really concerned about, if I were to have another month or so, could I get a higher, GMAT or GRE score? You want to talk to someone about what are the factors, because it's a complex matrix of decision making here. It's not just that one thing will define your chances. So you want to have someone look at it holistically. I also don't know. I remember back in the 2008 recession, and as I said, we were speaking the other day, I'm dating myself here. I remember very vividly, 2008 happened.
Carla, we are all the same generation, because I
know we were working. I was working at INSEAD at the time, but
running into my office and being like, what the heck just happened to Lehman Brothers? 100%.
Yeah, I remember very vividly the debates, Lehman is not going to go down. There's no way. And then it's it's gone.
I remember those conversations.
So, and people that were, in the INSEAD program. And then not long after that, I moved to HBS in 2012. And that was actually the year that we saw the peak in terms of numbers. So it was super interesting that, yes, there was a climb. And that was, in my opinion, yes, we're headed towards a recession, but it definitely doesn't feel like 2008. And so when I compare those two things, and that's my main reference point, I remember looking at the numbers and how it grew over time, both for MBA as well as in the PhD program. And it was a climb, but it wasn't overwhelming, and certainly one round versus the other. So I don't imagine that there's going to be this giant flood round 2, which means that you have to apply round 1. I do think that when you're ready, apply, and, make sure that you're focusing on putting your absolute best foot forward and, not missing any I's or, crossing any T's. I think in terms of getting everything together, that's going to optimize your chances more than trying to say, oh, if I go round 1 versus round 2, that there's a material difference. I really don't think that's the case. I think do the best that you can, and dive deep when you want to, or when you're available to really focus on these different components of the application. So I think it's sort of there is probably some evidence, and there probably will be some additional applications. I'm not trying to pretend that there's not going to be an adjustment. There were many times in business schools where numbers were down. We're like, what we need is a good old fashioned recession to get these numbers back up. But I think now it's less sensitive, I think, than perhaps it has been in the past. But even in the most dramatic years, it really wasn't an immediate uptick that was overwhelming. So, while HBS doesn't have a round 3, I do think that, there are some programs, and even during the pandemic, some schools opened up, more rounds just to make sure that they were capturing the best individuals. So they look at the numbers all the time. And so they're predicting based on the number of applications that are started at different phases. I remember we used to always look at the numbers, like, what are we projecting? What is the volume like? How does that compare to previous years? And how does that impact how many seats that we're going to allocate in terms of offers for round 1 versus round 2? So they're not doing this in a vacuum. They're paying attention as well. And they want to make sure that they're capturing as many high potential individuals as possible. So, while you're trying to, strategize here, they're also doing the same thing. So that's what leads me to believe that I think regardless of, it may not be worth it rushing this summer if you know that you're going to have a really heavy deal flow, and it might be better to wait till round 2 when you're going to have a little bit more time to be more reflective and take your application to the next level. So, again, I think there's a lot of upside, but again, it really does depend. There might be some of my, clients, some that work in consulting, where I know that the expectation is that if you're in an MBB, a lot of the times it's better to apply round 1. Many of them are sponsored, and so they sort of build that into the model there. So again, it's complicated. I probably raise more questions in answering this than any before, but I do think that it is important to have someone with a detached view and a careful eye looking at your situation to give you the best possible advice, and to really think of, in terms of your own profile and your own candidacy, when are you able to put your best foot forward realistically, and then have that be the guiding decision.
And then one thing I want to add, and this is just from my many years of experience in the field, is don't put all your eggs in the HBS, Harvard, Wharton, Stanford basket for round 1 necessarily. Like if you've got second choice or third choice schools, throw one of them in for round 1 as well. Never a bad idea to show a little love early on. Never a bad idea to get an admit under your belt, which makes you feel great, right? So I know it's antithetical, but don't save your second and third choice schools for round 2, because that actually can end up shooting you in the foot. Schools like you to see you early. They see demonstrated interest. They see enthusiasm. So just something to tuck away in the back of your mind as you're kind of considering everything else.
I completely agree, Judith. And sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry to jump in, but I think I say this with an asterisk of there are certain programs that do favor early application. Harvard, I don't think is one of them necessarily or holistically. However, places like Columbia or MIT Sloan might, their goal is to fill the class with as strong of individuals as soon as possible, and to give those seats to people who are worthy. So, and the other point that you had about adding in extra ones, the other thing that a lot of people don't think about is that it might be worthwhile to add in a, beyond Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, Kellogg or Booth or one of the other ones, because a lot of those programs are competing for top talent with scholarships.
Right.
And so that gives you leverage. That gives you leverage to, this school wants me for this much. It can help you if you're waitlisted at a place like Harvard or Stanford or somewhere else. And so, seeing that these other programs really want you and are willing to, pony up with funding, I think that is an area that a lot of people don't necessarily anticipate. So even if it's not your top choice, I think there are synergies across the applications that you can leverage, and doing that in one go is much more, it's optimal, I think, for a lot of individuals. So, there's a variety of considerations, and you want to be realistic too, that the reality is that there's plenty of people who are amazing fits for Harvard and Stanford and Wharton who are not going to get a seat. And that is humbling, and that is hard to hear. but the numbers it's really competitive. Stanford's admit rate is around 6%. Harvard is just over 10%. And there's very few people who are applying who aren't awesome. So not a lot of people are going to waste their time. So the competition is fierce. And so you do want to be considerate of that and also humble about that, again, will help you optimize your chances and maximize your potential. But the reality is that it's always smart to have, as you said too, it can boost your confidence.
How do I tackle the MBA essay? And just want to make sure, is this Carla? That's your question,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So I think this year they've truncated the length to 900 words. So it's an interesting. They're really forcing you to be, as I like to say, pithy and succinct as possible. Not always my strength, but I do think that it can be really helpful. That this is going to require a certain amount of discipline, and so you're going to have to look at your overall profile and decide, in answering the question, what more do you want us to know about you? And again, I think like a lot of times you want to make sure that you've had a full view of the actual application, that you filled that out, because you don't want to answer the what more before you've given them the more. You want to have this be a reaction to like, what have I shared already? And you don't want to be overly redundant. You might be able to zero in on a theme that emerged, or, tie together, different aspects of your application. With respect to your resume too, what's the story here? What is the driving force behind all of these things that I see on the resume and these accomplishments? And, or maybe you've had more of a circuitous route and you want to stitch it together with, here was my journey and here's my search and here's where I landed, and going to HBS is going to point me in the direction where I want to be. Or I've always known that I want to be an investor and I'm, full speed ahead, but I'm interested in impact investing now. And so getting an MBA will help me with that moving forward. So whatever your story is, you don't want it to just be a goals essay either. Sometimes people will go on and on. Oh, I want to do this, and then I want to do this, and then I want to do this. And anyone can speculate. Past performance is a great indicator of future potential, but you may want to go deeper and tell a much more personal story that helps them understand what is, as I mentioned before, the driving force behind the accomplishments and the decisions that you've made. So much of what HBS does is help you learn to make better decisions in the face of ambiguity. That's really at the heart of what the case method does. And so they want to understand, like, how did you and why did you make the decisions that you made? And are you getting better at that? So there's a number of ways that you could approach it. They say you don't have to go up to 900 words. I've seen people successful in this process with a, really solid one page that's illuminating. And it needs to be something that they would not know about you or be able to readily guess about you just by looking at, the other elements of your application. But make sure that you're fleshing out the profile. Keep in mind the community engagement, appetite and aptitude, leadership piece, the CAL or the CAL, as Rebecca was saying earlier. That is essential because that's what they're going to be looking for and looking to evaluate. So you want to look at this essay, and there's different strategies, there's different models for it, but you want to be open and you want to be more vulnerable and probably more personal than you might have anticipated. Rebecca, I definitely don't want to put you on the spot here, but I don't know what you wrote about topically in terms of your essay, but I know you had a very creative and a very different background than most of your peers. So I don't know how you approached it at the time, but if you can go back and recall, like, what was it topically that you spoke to might be interesting as well.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Carla. My background was in the arts and in publishing. And so I came from a very creative background. I was going to have a vertical learning curve when I came there. And I was someone who was really going to benefit from, not just the network, not just the strategic thinking, but, a lot of the actual coursework. And I remember very clearly that, my essay was about the fact that I've always been pulled in two different directions, creative and analytical. And I am both of those things. And I was able to look through my academic career and my early career and show how actually, problem solving is creative, and how I've been able to take these two passions and, bring them together to help organizations do very diverse things. So I'm a generalist, and I'm someone who has made, worked in a number of different industries and a number of different functions because I have these two abilities. And it was terrific because at the time, only 5% of HBS's students came from a background that was not banking or consulting. So marketing was considered creative. And what and so I didn't know if I had a shot at HBS or not. And, well, we can talk about this later a little bit, but the interview section, but they really saw that I did have the competencies, the background, and the ambitions. Like they took the time, I took the time in my essay to explain why the aspirations I had, why the way I thought and my preparation was suitable for HBS. And to their great credit, they took the time to really understand that. And then even asked me some questions about it in my interview. And then, I had a fantastic experience and was always excited to meet other people who had a very different background. And they kept track of us. How are you doing? This is really strange for you. There was another woman in my class who had run an art gallery. And, our admissions director would touch base with us every once in a while, going, okay, what you thought it would be, what you hoped it would be. And that's how much they really do want diversity of, personality types, of backgrounds, of aspirations. And then, they help you make that jump. But yeah,
Becca,
my essay was laying it all on the line. Pardon?
This was also pre-email, so she was finding you in the hallway to ask you what you thought.
Yeah, actually, we were bumping into each other on campus, and I have to say that one thing I was trying to hide from the rest of my peers, because I didn't really think it was going to help my my image in ops management class, was that I'm a singer. And, finally it came out second semester, and I've sung at pretty much like every reunion, everything since. But yeah, the essay was where I was honest. I have these two passions, and, some people might think that you should overlook this. Here's how I've used them to my advantage and to other people's and organizations' advantages. And they really paid attention and they loved it.
Judith, I'm probably going to make you angry right now, but I really just want to add one thing that she highlighted, which is
I'm delighted. My gosh,
I'm always derailing these and going over. But the point is that what you mentioned, Rebecca, is so true. It's like, what are you passionate about? And why is that? And I think that that's absolutely what you said is so helpful and so valuable, because so much of what you see, especially with the PR coming out of HBS right now, and a lot of what Chad Losey has tried to do, is say, it's frustrating for them because there's so many people who kind of self-select out of the process. They assume they have to come from banking or consulting in order to get, to get into the program or to be competitive. And so you have this massive flood. And I remember being there, and it was like, wow, like you think that we wouldn't have to do marketing, but if we didn't, it would just be an entire classroom full of consultants and bankers, and that would make it fall apart essentially. So they want people who, and try to strategically find individuals who have very different backgrounds. Not to say that the bankers and consultants don't belong there too, but there is an overabundance. And so I think sometimes, I've seen individuals who even like quit their job in consulting and then applied and have been, in a totally different competitive field. So, sometimes that goes counter to what you might assume, but make sure that you're checking your assumptions in this. And also, the story that you want to tell, I think really zero in on, what are you passionate about and what's really driving you, and how does that align with what you would be able to unlock with the education that you would get at HBS. And it's hard to know because you've never been there before, but that's where talking with students, even cold emailing people who are, within the program. There's a lot of clubs and different organizations. And if you find that, oh, I have an affinity for this, I might want to reach out to the president of XYZ club. And that can be another way to learn, like, what is it that, my background could provide, and, even validate, some of the things that we're saying today in terms of what might support your application and really help you stand out, and also have a standout essay, because it is critically important. A lot of people think that this is just something where it's like, oh, I'll just throw something together, but it does make or break the application many times. But it is not an essay writing contest. Sometimes if it's a little too polished or a little too perfect, it's like, maybe you're in the wrong field. Maybe you should be, writing novels for your, but so I think that's the thing that people over index on, is that they think that the actual crafting and the, of the story is so important in terms of the quality of the writing. Whereas like, look, like the more real and raw you can be here, and open and honest, plain English, no thesaurus should be involved in the process of writing your essay. And I mean that you want it to make sense. And you want it to build on itself, and don't try to do gymnastics with your sentences.
And I liked, Carla, what you said earlier about like, life is messy, right? It doesn't have to be like everything's all shiny, happy all the time. And sometimes finding stuff that's
not believable,
right?
Like whose life is like that? It's usually like, those are the brochures of humans that we used to talk about. It's like, oh, we got another brochure. Where's an actual real life human who struggled and, had challenges that have been hard to overcome that have stretched them. But that's actually the most interesting and where you learn the most. There's this saying that like there's either comfort or growth, but you can't have both. And so they want to know, when did it get hard and how did you handle that? And
basically
what was the outcome?
The stuff that you do not post on Instagram, that's the stuff that you want to go into your HBS essay.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Thank you. So there's a part of the application that is actually kind of out of your hands, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to be talking about the recommendation letter. So Becca, do you want to tackle that? And this is a toughie, right? You're trusting people that you know, you're trusting people that you're hoping will take a little bit of guidance or a lot of guidance from you, but ultimately you don't get to write it. That's a note, everybody, you don't get to write it. Your recommender's writing it. So Becca, why don't you fill us in a little bit on how to tackle those recommendation letters?
Absolutely. You know what? You don't get to write it and you don't want to write it because this is a very, very powerful part of your package. You get a couple of recommendations, just two. They're not going to look at any more. They need to be people who've worked with you and know you well, but they can be a direct supervisor. They don't have to be a senior leader. In fact, a senior leader who doesn't know you very well isn't going to be more compelling, and they might be less so. So a couple of questions that they're going to ask. And, one is how, in terms of your performance, your potential, and your personal qualities, how do you compare to other really well-qualified people in similar roles? And then they want to know how you respond to really important critical feedback. And then they have another question, is there anything else we should know? So in terms of response strategy overall, your recommenders need to stick to the questions asked. They need to be specific and they have to be truthful. And that's, the thread that Carla's been talking about. We've been talking about this all the way through. HBS wants to know who you really are. A recommender can't fluff things up or sell you. If you have what it takes to be at HBS or to be a really strong candidate for HBS, then you have plenty of material and they don't have to be listing qualifications, and they shouldn't. That's throughout the application. So they need to stick to the questions asked, be specific and truthful. So in terms of preparation, what the recommender is going to actually do, we want them to explain your exceptional qualities. So Carla's talked about identifying your key differences. So everybody who applies is probably exceptional in a number of different ways. They don't have to be the best in everything, but you all have a spike. There's something that you're one or two things that you are really differentiating yourself. And those are the things that you're going to want your recommenders to be emphasizing. And so they want to pick 2 or 3 examples, 2 or 3 situations in which you exhibited these things, and then the positive impact that you had in doing so. So remember, it's not just what you did, it's what was the impact of that. And then ideally, they can honestly rank you in some sort of qualitative terms. They can say, this person is the strongest in this particular area, this quality that I've ever seen in my career, or this is the strongest person we've had in this program, in X amount of time. This third party recommendation is so important because you've tried to present this picture in the means that you have throughout your application, but now this is a third party, their opportunity to second that and use their own language and their own experience to contextualize it. And just again, to emphasize what Carla was saying, you don't have to be the best at everything. We're not. Nobody is. What Harvard wants to see is growth potential, and the recommendation is a key way that they see that. They also want to see, again, yes, the diversity of backgrounds, talents, personal qualities, aspirations. And that's because, in the real world, in the business world, and life in general, we need a lot of different kinds of input and perspective to make good decisions. And that's what happens in the classroom with the case study. And that's what happens in your career throughout when you end up staying in touch with your HBS classmates. So that's what the recommender has to do. They also have to answer a question about response to feedback, your response to feedback, and what you want your recommenders to do. Thinking back over what Carla said, a time that life got tough and how did you respond, or a time that you failed. I don't know what failure is. It didn't go as planned. Cite a real and meaningful development area, something that you weren't strong in, and be able to explain how you took the feedback well and then made a material improvement. It's not about showing that you're perfect, that you have no development areas. They want to know that you have upside, that you want to improve, that you don't just receive feedback well, but that you also solicit it. That can be very hard. That you're coachable and that you stand out from peers in this respect. It can be, the truth can be uncomfortable, but having the courage to share it and address it is highly valued at HBS. And think about it, that's highly valued in business as well. Look at all of the scandals and issues that different organizations and industries have had. You need to, if you can show them that you can tell the truth and the hard truth on your recommendation, then you're possibly the kind of leader that they want to see managing these difficult situations out in the world. So how do you prepare? Your interview is 30 minutes. It's going to be an MBA Admissions Board member who has reviewed your app. That doesn't happen at all the schools, but the person who interviews you is going to have read everything, and they're tailoring their questions accordingly. In other words, they've treated your app like an HBS case study. You are the situation with opportunity, and their job is to find out what it is that you have to offer. They really want to experience in the interview the qualities that you've told them that you possess, and they want to experience in their interaction with you what you have told them that you're going to contribute to the classroom and to the business community when you graduate. So in terms of prep, if to ace this, you want to touch on both content and your style of communication. Content, it's totally obvious. Know your application cold. Then you really want to be able to offer a clear rationale for your past professional decisions. Carla touched on this, what you hope to achieve with each move. How did it fit into a broader career vision? And then really importantly, because our careers don't always go the way we want, or the world changes and our desires change or our capabilities change, whether or how you made mid-course corrections as you learned along the way. So what you wanted to do with each move, how it fit into a broader vision, and then how you made course corrections when they were necessary. You're also going to need to display a really deep and sophisticated understanding of your industry. In describing your career vision, perhaps the questions that they ask you about that, or answering other questions, about the broader environment. So for instance, they might ask you how COVID has impacted your business. And even if you didn't particularly have anything to do with your business's COVID response, et cetera, you're going to need to display an understanding of how that might have affected it. So I'm not saying that's a question that you will get, but they will be looking to understand whether your industry at a really sophisticated level and, beyond perhaps maybe what your actual role is. And that's very important to be able to work in there. And then finally, you want to be able to explain, why you want an MBA, and specifically a Harvard MBA, why it's necessary for achieving your professional aspirations. And, that sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised at the number of people who, as Carla was talking about, so many people in their profession get an MBA at a certain point, and that's as far as they've thought of it. And that's just not a good enough answer. Why do you need an MBA? Why isn't it another degree? Or why isn't it just continue to work? Why do you need an MBA? And why does it have to be a Harvard MBA? Because it is a different program. And why now? So that's the content. You really need to be on top of all of that. In terms of style, and this is equally important, you want to be clear and concise. And I could be more concise right now. Confident, but not arrogant. And that's really important. You want to practice, and this is a tough one, don't over-rehearse a set of anticipated questions. If it sounds canned, if it is canned, it's going to be a turnoff. Because again, they're not looking for perfection and they want to have a real conversation with you. And you're also going to miss important things that are happening. So you're better off, practicing the broad strokes, hitting the big points that you want to make when a certain question comes up, but really planning to be fully present in an interview situation, listening carefully and responding thoughtfully to exactly what they ask. Another thing that's important is to consider in advance how your tone and manner might be perceived by someone who doesn't know you. So, maybe you think you're coming off as confident, but not arrogant. But if you can get some feedback with from a trusted peer, or somebody that you're doing mock interviews with, they might be able to help you with some language and ensure that it's confidence not going over into the arrogant. But there are other ways that you want to understand how you're being perceived by them. Again, mock interviews are a terrific way to practice, and particularly if you can do a mock interview with somebody who has a lot of experience with these and can give you really quality feedback, and who's going to have the courage to tell you like it is. Very important.
Thank you so much. I am learning a tremendous amount from you both today. And I love, Becca, what you just said, that they're treating you like a case study, which sounds like everybody's ending up in a petri dish, but I definitely get where you're heading with that comment. Before we move into a couple of Q&A, and I know we've gotten some great ones, we have a lot of them. So I just wanted to remind everybody that if we don't get to your question this afternoon, you can certainly email us info@fortunaadmissions.com. You can also sign up for a free consult. Really, really happy to talk with you about your interest in applying to business school. I actually don't take any time off until later on in the cycle. So I am happy to talk to you as well. We'll make sure that we get the opportunity to chat about your interest in applying to business school and how possibly we can support you. So just a reminder again, we have a lot of questions, hoping to answer some. We know we won't be able to answer all, but you can always get to us after the session. Final tips, final ideas from Carla.
Yeah, so I want to actually, just further some of the points that Rebecca just made that I think are particularly salient and interesting. I think what she mentioned about the recommendations, the way I think of it is that letters of recommendation don't get you in, but they absolutely keep people out all the time. And the reason is exactly what Rebecca said, is that they lack, sometimes they can just focus on examples, but they don't talk about why those matter or contextualize them or qualify you. So having your recommenders, first and foremost, when you're deciding who to reach out to, my suggestion is to be tentative about it, because you want to ask a very specific and phrase it a certain way. Can I get a strong letter, or would you feel comfortable writing a strong letter of recommendation for me? And you can gauge their reaction. You might want to couch that with I'm considering applying. I'm looking at the MBA as a possibility. If I were to move forward, would you feel comfortable writing me a strong letter? And that way, if they're like, meh, you're not stuck with someone who's like, meh, so it's like, okay, good to know. And then ask them what they need from you in order to write a compelling letter, and remember to thank them, because it is a huge part of it. You cannot get in without a really strong letter supporting you. So that's number one. And I think the other piece too, just to further exactly what Rebecca was saying about, the feedback, if it's really generic and really, or like a humble brag, that's the worst. When it's like, oh, they're such a perfectionist and they've never, I told them that it's okay to make a mistake once in a while, and you're like, give me a break. I don't believe all the wonderful things that they said in the first question. So I feel bad for all the perfectionists out there. But, the other one that is really maddening is like, oh, I've never had to give this person critical feedback. And it's like, well, either you're a terrible manager or you're a liar. And neither is a good situation. That'll be thrown out the window. So you want to look at like someone who's going to be able to provide, specific. It needs to be specific. It needs to be believable. What was the situation? How was the feedback delivered? How did you react to it? And then what did you do from there? Did you continue to come back to that person and say, am I getting better at this? That was hard to hear, but really helpful for me to hear. And they want to look for people who are, they really want people in their environment and in the community who are really open to having their blind spots pointed out, because they want to get better. Versus individuals who are like, la, 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 I never make mistakes. Please don't tell me if I'm doing anything wrong, or someone who falls apart or gets defensive anytime someone says you could do this a little bit better. It'd be great if you could maybe apply another strategy. So that's another piece of advice that I have that I think can really make a difference. And then also further what Rebecca said too about ethics, so like morality, ethics, your moral compass does not show up on transcripts or your resume or anywhere else in your application. It's certainly not something that I would want you saying in your essay, I'm the most moral and ethical person in the world. That would go right in the face of humility, but also it's just weird. So I think that the opportunity for your recommenders to highlight, that this is someone who does the right thing when nobody's looking, and here's evidence of that, is so powerful, because that can be a defining and distinguishing feature for you compared to other people in your sector. So you want to think about examples, and in terms of providing them what they need to write you a really strong letter, they may not remember everything. So you'll want to put together a recommendation package for them that includes the highlight reel of accomplishments that define you, that are also aligned with the stories that you're trying to share in the application. It needs to be consistent, so that we have a portrait of you when we're looking at you on the other side of the table as admissions folks, seeing someone who this all checks out. This makes sense. This person has areas of development and growth. They have these incredible assets, and really defining the distinguishing features of who you are is so essential. They don't want the masters of none who are great or trying to be great at everything. That's not usually a great strategy. So, and it's rare to find those individuals, and it's also not optimal. So they want to find individuals that have, as Rebecca was saying before, the spikes, the really deep areas of competency, and then have those highlighted with evidence, and then explain why that mattered to the organization. I've seen a lot of reapplicants, and many times I'm like, send me your letters first if you have access to them. And that's usually where things went wrong, where they're like, this person did this and this and this, and also focused on this. And also, and I'm like, that's all great, but it's not clear to me if you're at the top of your group, or if you're extraordinary, or you're the best they've ever seen. And if that's not clear to me, my assumption is you're not. So, that can actually, it's a well-intentioned letter, someone who's giving but they assume that the reader has context for actually what you've been through. And unless they've been part of that organization or team, they're not going to. So that can take some coaching. And so a lot of people don't spend the time that is needed on the letters of recommendation, and you'll have a flawless application with an incredible essay and amazing test scores, and it goes nowhere. And usually that's why. You have to have those recommendations open the door for you to be given full consideration, to say, wow, this is someone who is consistently exceptional, even through the lens of folks who've worked with them before. And then in terms of the interview too, the last thing that I'll say there is exactly what Rebecca said, but just furthering on that was something that I did, being on the interview board. I watched a lot of interviews, and I saw how many people were overly scripted, or what they thought was, confidence was definitely arrogance. And, the sort of off the cuff advice that I got is really, your effort, Carla, here is to help weed out the jerks and the liars. And so it was really interesting to see that, when you come across as really scripted, if you practice too much, or try to come out with some canned response, or here's my pitch, my opening pitch, it just sounds like an opening pitch, and it does not sound like you're talking to a real human. And so that sense of authenticity is lost. So it's a delicate balance. You want to be prepared, but you do not want to have entire passages memorized or trying to squeeze in an answer where it doesn't belong. That also happens a lot of the time. So what Rebecca said about listening to the question, being present and reactive, they may cut you off, and they may give you 4 or 5 questions at one, just to make sure that you're not scripted. And there's certain strategies that you can deploy in terms of being able to manage those well.
I once heard somebody from Kellogg, I think it was the dean of Kellogg Admissions, said, it is like a dance, and you are not leading that dance. Right. So that was it stuck with me. We used to do these panels, and I was like, that's a good one. I'm going to keep that. Becca, any final tips before we move into a lightning round of Q&A?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've heard a theme all the way through this, that HBS wants real people, and they want to know who you are. And the implicit in that is you need to have done the work to really know what you want. And again, that might sound obvious, but it can be very difficult. It is so easy. If you are here, then you are a very driven, directed person. You're planning in advance. You're thinking long term. And it can be really easy to get swept up in other people's goals, your family's goals for you, your peers' goals, people that you respect and admire, your colleagues. And it's not going to come clear. You are not going to be convincing in your application if you yourself don't really know what you want and who you are. So it's worth making sure that you've sat down and you've taken that time and even asked yourself, why do I want what I want in terms of my career vision, in terms of the MBA I want now, and, really be thinking about those differentiators, but starting from a position of, is this true? Is this what I really want? If I could have anything, from what I know now, is this going to make me happy? And even just sitting down for an hour and really giving it that thought can help your whole application be stronger. Because if you are going in with the same goals and aspirations everyone else does, and you're not, if you don't have a real, an authentic differentiator, then you're not going to be able to write anything that's convincing them.
Thank you so much. I am just so happy that I had the chance to be with you guys today. We got a lot of questions, and I wanted to be able to answer some of them. I seem to have lost my cursor. So I'm just going to cherry pick a little bit. Question about guidance for reapplicants who made it to interview and are applying again. How much should the essay change? Carla, can you take that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. You definitely don't want to apply. I've seen people try to apply with the same essay before, and that is just a non-starter. So what you'll want to do with the essay is it should be new. This is 900 words. You can come up with 900 words that are expansive. So you want to be consistent unless your goals have changed. It's quite possible that, I had a situation where an applicant had been working in private equity. He made it to the interview stage and, then was not admitted. He was coming from a really crowded sector too. And he was also surprised when I told him, you definitely have to update we're writing a whole new essay. And so we looked at all the materials that he'd submitted before, and it was like, what else do they not know about you? It's answering that question again, like, what more do you want us to know? Maybe that, you did some soul searching after having made it that far and have learned something about yourself. HBS loves reapplicants. So a lot of people will get a no, and then they'll bow their head and walk away forever. And that's what most people do. So you're coming back. What are you trying to do this time around? Have you thought more about, yourself and your candidacy, and maybe it might've been that the interview was great and just that you were coming from a really crowded sector and you weren't distinctive enough. Maybe one person had one other thing that you didn't. You'll never know the answers to those questions. So what you want to do in order to optimize your chances for success the next time around is to think really deeply about what have you done in the last year. Maybe you've deepened your community engagement. Maybe there was an area of weakness last time that you want to strengthen. Maybe you need to take some other courses to show that you're ready to do the work. So you want to have someone who's well experienced with, looking at reapplications and working with the reapplicants to take a look at your past experience and advise you as best on, there's another area. I always think of it as like, I'm also a very creative person too. I think of like painting a portrait of someone. And maybe there was an area where you focused a lot on, for lack of a better, visual here, it's like, you have a portrait of someone's face. You did a lot on the eyes and the nose and the ear, but you might want to do more hair or more, some other areas where they get to see you better and more holistically. And so maybe something is deepened in your experience. Maybe you've gotten, some promotions, or maybe you've engaged in something outside of work. So you're the same person. So it needs to be consistent, but you may want to expand on what you shared before, or you might want to share something else completely new in terms of what is driving you or what you've learned in the past year, or maybe another element of your application. I had an applicant who was a third-time applicant, and I looked at his past 2 applications. The first time he went through, he got an interview and he did not get in. The second time he got an interview, he didn't get an interview. And then he came back a third time. And so I looked at his past, all of his materials, and I was like, I don't know who you are, actually. Like, I don't really understand. Like, I see these different segments of you, but I really want more personal information to understand what is driving all of these things together. And so we worked together on the application, and he has since graduated from HBS. And it's one of my favorite experiences because I was like, we got to get really deep and personal here. Maybe you weren't personal enough. So that's obviously going to depend on, what did you share last time? What else is there? You're obviously not going to be able to put everything, and you don't want to throw the kitchen sink at them, in terms of you want to have a really focused story and a clear narrative. So that's something that I think like getting feedback from other individuals can really help, because there's definitely another way to go through it, but you don't want to look like a totally different person. You want to help them understand, but you're also allowed to change your mind. So your goals might be different. And so maybe you've, been exposed to something new. Maybe you've met someone, maybe you've been networking with some people in the community and program, and you discovered another pathway that's a better fit. And so that might be something that you focus on for the next time. So great question, hard to answer without, detailed consideration of each individual case, but generally speaking, there's usually a lot more to share when answering the what more question. So do not submit the same essay and hope for the best. That will not work out.
Please, we beg you. Rebecca, I'm going to flip back to you. And then unfortunately, we're going to be out of time. So 2 questions about recommendation letters. One is really related to what if I'm coming from an industry where I don't have a lot of peers, right? I'm coming from a non-traditional. It's not like there are 7 of me in my group. And so how do I have my recommenders kind of talk about that? Should they talk about it, or should they be more like, here are the skills that this person has, and this is how they transfer? So can you talk about what if you're coming from a background? And again, I know we don't have a lot of time, so Thank you.
Sure. The important part about that is for them to be able to compare you to a high benchmark. So if it's not necessarily a peer in a similar role, it can be relative to what is expected on the job. It can be relative to the circumstances that you're facing. So, this person was able to do XYZ in this situation, which had this impact. And it was, far more than what we would have thought was possible, et cetera. Could also be comparing you to other roles in the organization at an earlier level. So, this person is operating beyond the scope of what we would expect for this role or this level. So the important point is by whatever scale they are measuring you on, that they provide the baseline for that scale. It can be expectations, it can be prior performance, other people been in the role, it can be other people who are more senior now, but when they were at a more junior level, it can be just what they've seen, the recommender has seen in their career. Maybe they have worked in other organizations that have more comparables. So it's just important to have a baseline, something that's more than just believe me because I said so, they're awesome.
Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry, but we are really out of time today. We really encourage you to sign up for a 30-minute strategy session. As I said, I'm around all summer. I would love to talk to you. We have other great members of our team that can give you some advice as well. Please register for our next masterclass, which is coming up next week. I wanted to thank my panelists, Becca and Carla, for just being amazing to work with today. I've had such a good time. I've learned an amazing amount, which to me is incredible because I've been at this for a long time. So have these guys, and we love being together and sharing what we know with all of you. You guys can reach us at info@Fortuna Admissions. You can reach me on LinkedIn, Judith Silverman Hodara. I'm happy to answer questions that haven't gotten answered today. And thanks so much for our partners at Poets&Quants. We hope to see you again next week. Take care, everybody. And thanks again, Becca
Judith.
and Carla.
Thanks, Becca.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, you guys. What a pleasure.
Thank you.